How much cow dung does it take to spoil a bowl of ice cream? That's what a professor of mine used to ask. How much cow dung does it take to spoil a bowl of ice cream? Now, I mean, just picture, you're sitting down for dessert. They bring out a nice bowl of ice cream. We happen to be in Texas. We got a good old Texas-sized cow patty. We sprinkle it up a little bit, put it on that bowl. Are you going to eat it? I know I'm not, for sure. So what in the world does that have to do with today's show? Because when I use that quote when I'm doing a keynote, I ask the room full of executives, could be 200, could be 2,000, how many poisonous employees does it take to spoil a company? What do you think the number they come back with is? Well, let me put it this way. You can count it on one finger, just one. I mean, think about it. You got a great company culture, great things going on, but one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. So we're really excited about having in studio. By the way, do you know you're our first guest?
Oh, wow.
I'm honored.
On the Global Company Culture
I didn't even think about
Association's Company Culture Podcast.
Wow.
You're numero uno.
Awesome.
So how exciting is that? So Pete is the author of The Arsonist in the Office and subtitled Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and
I kind of like fire.
You like that? Fireproofing? He's a fireproofer.
Absolutely.
So, Pete, great to have you in here. And your inspiration for this book was a lot of hard knocks that you experienced in the workplace. Give us a couple of just quick stories about what prompted this book in the first place.
Brother,
Did you
you're
set
not
your
kidding.
house on fire when you were a child? Is that why you were excited about fire?
Oh, my mom may be watching this, so I can't say exactly what may have happened when I was a kid. I had about the most bizarre experience in a job that you can ever imagine, and I wrote a book about it.
Okay.
And I should say, if the lawyers are watching, I've fictionalized this experience.
Yeah, names have been changed.
Exactly. I walk into a job. Within hours, people are coming up to me. I mean, normally you're going to get, hey, how you doing? Where have
Nice
you
to
been?
meet you.
Nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
tell us
I've
a
got
little
people
about you.
saying, I'm praying for you. I've got other people coming up to me talking about speculating what my next job is going to be, and I don't know what's going on.
Speculating about what your next job is.
Anytime your first conversation in the job is, I'm praying for you, you know you're in for some serious trouble.
No doubt. So I'll tee up the book just a little bit for folks. So I get called into the CEO's office, and he says to me, Pete, I probably should have told you all of this before, but I don't think you'd be here today.
Nice conversation.
It was lovely. The onboarding that you just want to have happen. And he says, there's a few things I haven't told you about your coworker, Hazel. She's filed dozens of complaints, has sabotaged work of other people, has made various threats throughout our organization. And, oh, by the way, Pete, we've given you most of her job, and she's not really happy that you're here.
Oh, boy.
She's coming after
Talk
you
about
next.
poking the hornet's nest.
Oh, my goodness.
We just poked the hornet's nest, and you get to office right next to it. Right?
That's right. It was, and he went on, and here's where the title comes from. He goes on to tell me a story. He said, if I haven't explained all of that I just did clearly enough, let me tell you kind of what you're in for and what you're dealing with. There was this volunteer fire department that had a rash of fires in their county. They'd usually have a few dozen, but they were up to nearly 100 on a particular year. Well, people started investigating a little bit, and they said, we want to get to the bottom of what's causing it. Is it climate change? What's going on? Well, they got down to it, and it was the firefighters that had started the fires. Started with somebody saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to get more equipment if we don't have more fires. Somebody else said, well, if we need more fires, I've got a buddy whose business is going south. Maybe he wouldn't mind us torching his business. And around, and some people liked lighting the fires because they were pyromaniacs. Other people began thinking, you know what? I love when they call us up in front of the county commission and say, congratulations, you guys are doing a great job. So the hero complex, the financial interest, all these different things. He wraps it up with a bow and says, so Pete, this is what you're dealing with. And I said, I'm working with the arsonist. And he said,
in the fire department.
That's right.
That is the most bizarre. Now, is that a true story?
It was his story.
Okay.
You do have within fire departments and working with them, talking with them regularly, you do have some folks that like seeing stuff burn and are attracted by a certain profession.
They go into it for a reason, right?
Exactly.
So, okay, now when we talk about in the office, though, there are clearly arsonists in the office
No
that
doubt.
are there with one agenda: just burn that sucker down.
There's
right.
got to be more than one in an office. I've worked in offices where there's more than one.
Where there's multiple,
But
right?
why
Because it
do-
tends to breed
Right?
itself.
It's like the Tribble episode on Star Trek back in the day, where you start with one, you feed it, and organizations often do of not dealing with the problem they've got. You fed that one Tribble on the old Star Trek episode, and the next thing you know, they're multiplying.
That has to be where the gremlins came from, right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, so give me some examples of toxicity in the workplace. I want to talk about why leadership allows it. I want to talk about when it is actually the leader. I want to talk about why those people get to stay as long as they stay. So, a smorgasbord. We got a ton to talk about on this because we used to do a show a long time ago. One of the single most popular episodes when we were talking about a toxic workplace culture. I worked in a oil and gas company and a refinery, and it was when you walked into the plant, some days you could smell product, right? And I would say, hey, it smells like refinery today. And they had this mantra that they would give me back, which was, that's the smell of making money. And I always said, that's the smell of losing money. Keep it in the pipe. If I can smell it, we're losing money. What are you thinking? But that's how they had sort of justified it. You can walk into companies, and I think the culture is palpable, but you can tell when there's toxicity in that culture. You can almost smell it, right?
Oh, quickly. And sometimes these things are disparate types of reactions. You've got the silent organization, where in meetings people don't want to say anything because they've learned that if they speak up, even with ideas, and encounters somebody above them, they're going to have their head knocked off when they bring it up,
right.
either
Which was-
professionally or verbally.
Which was, by the way, the culture at Ford Motor Company when Alan Mullally came in. People were afraid to speak up. They had a long history of, if you did speak up, especially about a negative thing, I mean, you could speak up and go, yes, I'm all in. That's what we need to do, boss. But if you raised and said, I think that's a disaster, or we've got a problem over here, they would actually just haul you out of there, right? Like you were done. And Mullally had to bring this culture of trust. And he talks about the first time someone did speak up in a meeting and they said, hey, I'm going to tell the truth. And everybody said, uh-oh. So when he did tell the truth and said the project's red, it's not green, like the whole board was lit up, Mullally started doing this. And they all looked to the back door to see the henchmen that were going to come in through the conference room and haul this guy out. And instead, he, of course, rewarded him for it. And that started that shift. But, I mean, I think that's a great indicator. If you've got silence in the room, if people are afraid to speak up, that's a pretty obvious indicator, right? That there's fear.
Do you ever think that Mullally talked to him beforehand and said, hey, I need to fix this problem. Would you mind speaking up?
If he did, he didn't tell. I mean, I got to see him speak and got to introduce him actually up in New York. He didn't tell that part of the story, but maybe. So you've got silence as an indicator. If people are, or they're whispering behind closed doors.
That's right. Secrecy, gossip. That there's almost, and you find this in war zones, for instance. There's a resistance going on. They have secretive communications.
Cold War.
That's right. It may be that the gossip is more accurate and widespread throughout an organization than the actual
It's definitely
official
more
communication.
exciting. Yeah.
Sure.
No doubt.
So I don't know if you have any research on this or numbers, but at what level of the organization do you typically see the toxicity? Is it an arsonist? Is it coming from the leader? Is it coming from middle management? Is it coming from some just disgruntled team member down here who's frustrated at everything, or can it kind of be all over the map with that?
Sure. Starting at the bottom, I think you probably may have, say, within low-level departments, you might have pockets, and this is assuming that the rest of the organization isn't toxic, but at the lower levels, you may have a manager that's bugging a few employees, or verbal abuse in isolated areas. But if you've got it at the top, you've got problems because it's going to cascade down. You're going to have leadership sending signals to management. You're going to have management passing that on down. And we know a lot of stuff that travels downhill is not always that great.
Right.
Boulders and a whole lot of other things. But that, if it starts at leadership, yeah, the whole organization is going to have the tone set for it, whether people know it or not.
Okay, so I don't want to throw a curveball, but I'm going to throw a curveball because I've been thinking about this. I've been reading a book about Elon Musk, right? Iconic. I think Elon Musk is going to go down as a current day Tesla, not because of the vehicle, but Tesla, the inventor, right?
But
Hold up, but we've got Steve Jobs, right? Iconic, created what we're all carrying around with us today. I mean, just built an absolute empire.
Genius, but
To a certain extent, and I would say less or so, I'm actually listening to a book about Jeff Bezos, but Bezos has his crusty side, right?
Sure.
crusty side. I like that.
All of
That's
these
new.
leaders who have built these iconic companies that the stories with Jeff Bezos maybe excluded, but the stories certainly about Jobs and about Elon Musk are just epic. I remember hearing a story about Elon told one of his managers that they wanted this deadline, you got to hit this thing. The guy comes in one day and says, we're not going to be able to make the deadline. And Musk looks him in the eye and says, okay, well, congratulations, you're fired. And the CEO of the company is now going to take over your job and hit that deadline. And then you're always going to live with the embarrassment of knowing that the CEO had to do it for you because you couldn't do it, okay?
Wow.
Boom. So, is that toxic? Is that performance? Because there's a fine line between expecting a lot out of people and having a very rigorous sort of expectation to perform some of these incredible things, like building rockets to go to the moon, and actually being toxic. And how do you balance that with these sort of pseudo-genius leaders who have this really, really
They're
rough
quirky.
side?
Yeah.
Sure. I think it's how close you are to where the grenade is exploding. Probably that's a lot of it. I mean, as consumers, if Jeff Bezos wants to drive people crazy in his office, I still get my packages on time. So
Right.
from a distance,
And
we
some
probably
might,
don't care.
and some might argue you get your packages on time because of that.
That's true.
Now, I wonder if that's the case, and I wonder if we're morphing into a new. I think all of this comes out of the Machiavellian question of, is it better to be loved or feared? And I think people do more things for people they love. But I do think a lot of these driven leaders have bought into that. I mean, maybe they're, and I don't want to get into psychoanalysis, but they're coming from their own background of, pressures and all of that kind of stuff. But the best way to get something out of somebody is just to, tighten those screws. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's really effective.
I think it can work for a while at some sort of performance level.
Right.
In that self-preservation, people value their careers, for instance. That's going to motivate people for a while. Does do it for the long run? No. But if you think you're going to be losing your job quickly, if you don't get into line with what the person who's writing your paychecks every couple of weeks is doing, you're gonna perform at some level. It's just a question of whether it's the best for the team, the long run, for those people's families and everything else.
True.
Because the problem with fear and the problem with toxicity is you don't get people speaking up for the most part. You don't get that discretionary idea and things coming. It's
No
just
doubt.
it's sort of, and you we're talking with leaders now, and I want to move around the company some. But as a leader now, you are 100% responsible for every single thing. You have to keep a hand in everything and keep cracking that whip, right? And contrast that with the just cleverness, the just wisdom of a Newt Rockney. And we were hearing a great story the other day. It was in a book we were listening to, and it says that Newt, when he was coaching Notre Dame, they played a horrible first half. All he did was he walked into the locker room, he took a look around and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong room. I thought this was for the Notre Dame football team," and walked out. Now, the subtle message being, I don't know who you guys think you are, but you're not Notre Dame. They came out and crushed it the second half. They were so embarrassed. we've humiliated our coach. He's now humiliated us, but it was a really subtle kind of way. It wasn't a backlashing and you guys suck. What are you doing out there?
Well, and the other thing in that story is if the team played well in the second half, they obviously knew what it meant to be truly Notre Dame. That pride you ought to be showing, the performance level. They knew what their values were, and he said they weren't measuring up to it. Guys, go out there and do what you're supposed to be doing as a member of the team, and that's where a lot of leadership is lacking these days, in that people are sent in a whole lot of different directions but don't know what the organization stands for, and we shouldn't be surprised when people go off the reservation and do things if they don't know what the core values are.
I think that is so incredibly true. There was a study recently about people that, majority of people don't trust their leadership. And then they were talking about the majority of people who are put in management positions get no management training.
It's true.
Some 60%. Of them, 60%, some of them get it a year after the fact. Well, you've already done a lot of damage, right? And then there's a much smaller percentage that actually get some kind of leadership training. I mean, so sometimes people are operating out of a vacuum of not knowing what to do, either in management or out in the field.
No doubt.
And then they screw up and they get yelled at, and it's like yelling at a puppy dog. Okay, then they just get this freeze. Like, what do I do? Where do I go?
But
it's not training.
Yeah, but going back to your story, I was in a meeting once with the owner of a company, which will remain nameless, and the owner says, we need a manager in this position. I've got a great idea. We'll take them all to a bar. We'll get them some drinks. We'll play this game. The person that wins the game gets to be the manager. And I'm like, that's not how you choose a manager.
I don't know. It's better than some.
But you see how they're choosing. The person that won the game, it doesn't mean they have managerial experience, but they came out on top of the game he was going to play. It was
the reality show.
Unfortunately, sometimes the toxic people are also the biggest rear end kissers, right? And they get noticed. Oh wow, what a great
because they
person.
Choose the people they want to connect with, right? So you want to be connected with you, but that means I'm gonna, smear the other people to get your attention
instead of just being a decent person.
Exactly.
So what are some other examples of a toxic workplace?
A big one, and I have it as the number one on my list, is retaliation. That when you speak up, people disappear. That's a huge one, and I think it's probably the single biggest killer of motivation, of performance, a whole lot of things. Because
so give me an example. Retaliating for what? Like
an example that I talk about in the book, and it set off a series of different events. AmerisourceBergen, large drug distributor in the nation and around the world, had a chief operating officer who found a problem. And he identified the problem that drugs were being mislabeled or underdosed, all these different things. And he said, guys, we can't do this legally, financially, reputationally, just a bad idea. So he puts up the red flag, waves it, and does it in a few different meetings. He finds himself out of a job. It sent a message certainly to the rest of the organization, but they also created a federal whistleblowing case as a result of that, in that they radicalized an employee to become a whistleblower when he was only trying to do what he thought was the right thing and was proven to be the correct thing as a business practice within the organization. But imagine the shockwaves that sent around the organization.
The message that sends. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And $875 million in federal fines that came as a result of what cascaded from him saying, we've got a problem.
$875 million.
Okay,
this stuff is expensive.
That's right.
I mean, this stuff costs you money, right?
And it starts around a table like this with, okay, let's talk about the challenges we're facing in distribution. And it keeps on going and going and going. And you get a whistleblower, then you get a lawsuit, and the next thing you know, you are in my book.
I love it. Okay, so we want to hear some more stories when we come back. But first, we got a quick little video about the opposite of that, how having a great company culture actually can make you money. How would you like to increase your company's profitability by 71%? How would you like to increase your company's profitability by 756%? I'm talking about impact to the net profitability. Is that actually doable? Of course it is. And it revolves around one thing: how you do your culture. One Harvard study showed that companies that get culture right see a net profitability increase of 756% on average over the course of 10 years. How much money are you leaving on the table by having a low engagement culture? Gallup shows that the typical company has a 29% engagement year after year. That means 71% of the people are not really churning on all cylinders and not contributing that much to the bottom line. So what if you could get that 71% engaged? What a difference that would make. And not only is that doable to survive into the future and thrive, it's a must happen. If you're going to attract and retain top talent, you better have a company where 100% of the employees are engaged. It becomes contagious. When you've got 20% of the people doing 80% of the work, you are leaving massive amounts of profitability and impact on the table. In fact, I'm convinced that if the numbers showed up on a profit and loss statement about how much money was going down the toilet because low employee engagement, that the C-suite would completely stop the company down until they addressed this very important issue. So if 71% of the people are not engaged, either 71% of the people just don't care, or 71% of the workers just suck, or the bigger issue is that the company culture is not engaging, and that's why people are checked out at work. You want to change your profitability, you need to focus on your company culture. Boom. The stuff. I mean, there's such a big swing between getting your culture right and not getting your culture right. And I mean, there's, the first do no harm that they have as part of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors, swear to. When we talk about toxic cultures, that is the opposite of just having a mediocre culture. That's actually having a negative return on your culture in the kind of response that you get from people.
It's quit digging.
Okay, quit digging. So give me some examples of what you've seen just out there in the workplace, and what are the big things that companies get stuck on?
One of the biggest challenges that the companies are having these days is that question of, what do I do with the great employee from a productivity standpoint or financial standpoint? My rainmaker,
right?
Who's a jerk?
Yeah.
Who's a nightmare?
We met with a company
out?
recently that their top salesperson alienates everybody else in the sales force.
Absolutely. And companies make the calculation, and a wrong one and an incomplete one, on what the cost is. The cost of the people that flee the company, the other good employees that don't want to deal with this person. The side effects that may come from it.
They're not measuring correctly.
No.
And there's a reason why Netflix says we don't hire intelligent jerks. We just don't.
Super intelligent jerks, yeah.
There's a reason, because they've actually done the work. It's like when you work for Uber and you don't calculate. You say, "Ooh, I'm getting all this extra money," but you're not calculating the wear and tear on your car,
That's right.
the gasoline you're paying for, the parking, the time you spent. You're not calculating all these in, and you're actually like in a negative, but you think you're in a positive. It's like a fake positive going on.
Okay, but you're the CEO and you're going, I've got one person or these two people producing 80% of our revenue out of a 20-person company or whatever. We'll go small. I mean, that's a struggle, right? How do you deal with that? And what would you coach or counsel that leader in terms of that situation? Here they are. They've got their top producer, which is also just an absolute jerk to work with. What do you coach them to do?
I think number one, you have to have a full calculation. So as you were talking about, factor in everything, and certainly the lost people, the reputation you can lose, the stories of the financial downside to it, because you had a case with a major bank years ago that they had the untouchable employee, cost them billions of dollars because nobody wanted to go near that department, and they avoided the problems, found themselves having to write off billions and billions of dollars. There was an issue there, they didn't want to touch it. And then one of the biggest things is once you send the signal that there's two sets of rules in an organization, you're starting a heck of a lot of problems for your organization, in that it sends signals to everybody else that rules don't matter. The values of the organization are whatever various people in leadership decide they are. And that's where companies get in a lot of trouble.
So you see this with pro teams. In fact, I think Jimmy Johnson, when he first came to the Cowboys, tried to eliminate that. But hey, if you're late for practice, you don't get to play that week, right? Well, what if it's Troy Aikman, who I must add would never be late for practice? We love you, Troy Aikman. Hope to bump into you again soon. And I mean that seriously. He would never be late to practice, right? Nor would Larry Bird or a lot of people. But Emmitt Smith wouldn't. I mean, you've just got Dak wouldn't. So, but what he had to do, there were a few marquee situations where he had to say, no, I mean it. I don't care how much money you're making or how crucial you are to the success. Now, when that happens, it's not that double standard. Guess who's making sure everybody's on time, especially the ones that can help them for sure win that week, right? You get the culture, which is really kind of reinforcing those messages itself. When you've got the, hey, everybody, this is the way we operate. Somebody just walked by and waved at me. I love this studio where we've got the live action. There was a guy earlier that was going like, what's going on? He's just trying to get on camera. We got like photo bombed on our podcast. I didn't
have advertisers that you can put up logos as they
don't give them any ideas. Now you're going to have all sorts of product placement. Red Bull out the window there, right? People are going to be holding up their books.
I'm here to help.
And I think we should start a whole thing with this. Just the paid spot to be in the window.
You could bring out my bathing suit. I'm ready.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't even know where we were. But it makes a big difference if you've got two sets of rules. I always talk about the gap between the stated culture and the actual culture being the bigger the gap, the more dysfunctional the company. And the more different the rules are, specialized for each person, then you start to get to breakdown where it's just about status and who knows who.
I call it HBM management, defined by hold my beer. That once you set that standard, hold my beer and let everybody do what they're going to want to do, because you don't have a set of rules anymore. You've got opinions.
Yeah. And it starts to be that good old boy, that good old whatever culture where it's just like
you're
who
going
you
back
know,
to
it's
high
not what
school,
you
who's
know,
popular and who's not. You're popular, so you get away with more stuff. Or your mom knows the principal, so you get away with more stuff.
Which is different from a true performance standard in some ways. If someone is really performing at a better level, they get more benefit from that. They may get a bigger bonus, or but it's tied to actual metrics.
And going back
not just that
to
person.
your point about how does a CEO handle this, because he's seeing that one person is generating 80% of the income, right? You're a CEO, you think, that person generates all my money. I need them, right? I can't do without them. But they are forgetting to consider that they're actually a hole in the boat, right?
Yeah.
If you plug the hole, you could probably swing by with less money. So you're spending more and you think you need them, but in actuality, you need 3 people who are good for the culture, which can eventually be trained up into something better.
It's just not worth it. It's like hanging on to a bad boyfriend or girlfriend that's just wreaking havoc in your life, right?
He beats me, but I love him.
So
The other thing I was going to say on that, what we just described is really as much of a symptom as it is the diagnosis of a disease, in that if you've got leadership that isn't willing to have a conversation with an employee in particular, Joe Schmo is toxic, he's running everybody off. If you're not willing to have that conversation, what other things are you dodging in your company that you don't want to talk about?
And companies should have this built into their, this should be day one. Look, you need to understand the game rules around here. And one of the things is we treat each other in a certain way.
That's right.
And that's a term of your employment. I think attitude applies as well. You can't come in a bad mood. We talked about that. You can't come in and be grumpy all day, right? There's all sorts of cost. So the workplace is a different setting, and there should be a certain expectation of behavior when we're showing up at a workplace. Lots of people will tell you, I want to fire them, I want to get rid of them, But HR just won't let me. They just tell me I can't. And so I've got a thing in a company of owners I call you're fine, you're fine, you're fired. How often do you see this, that those people who are actually toxic, who are creating a lot of dissension, are getting 5s out of 5s every year, and then they finally push it too far, and now you want to fire them, and you know the legality of that is saying you can't have been saying this person's a rock star, and all of a sudden now just on a whim
That's
you
how
want
the
to get rid of
lawsuits
them.
happen. Yeah.
Sure. Have you
I get
seen
5 out of 5 out of 5, and then one day I get it. 1 year I get a 1, and then
Yeah.
I'm fired. Of
And,
course I'm
I'm
sue.
doing the same what I've been doing. It's just you pissed off the wrong person one too many times.
Well, and you didn't start out with the right metrics.
Right.
Or I should say, not a complete set of metrics that you needed.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so
How can people get in touch
hold
with
on,
you?
not yet. So again, the exact opposite of what we're talking about. We had the opportunity, the Global Company Culture Association had the opportunity to sit down with the CEO of Access Healthcare. Phenomenal guy. I think we're going to co-write a book together about Africa. He's from Nigeria. Watch this quick hit video with John Alajde from Access. I am so honored and thrilled to be at Access today with the great CEO, founder. I don't even know what your title is, John, but you started this company. The reason I'm here today is to talk about this amazing culture that you have created at Access.
You know, we have something at Access that we call the Access Way. It's in our DNA to want to solve problems. So we've got an entire group of people that care about solving problems,
Right.
making lives better. So for our people, it's important that we give them, provide an environment for them where they can do their best work. Accessians, our people at Access, we believe the future of care is in the home. Technology, cost, patient choice, and convenience is driving healthcare home. So how can we empower them to do their best job? How can we empower them to make sure we recognize their merit? Our coaches made the best idea win, whether you're the CEO or a new intern, your voice matters. And then for our clients, it's making sure that they get a sense that they're getting a lot more than they're paying us for. You know, there's that popular saying that if you're gonna go fast, go alone. If you're gonna go far, go with others. Once all that happens, the results are obvious. It's worked for us. So that's the Access Way. That's really what drives our culture overall.
We walked in today and our eyes lit up because I always say about culture, it's in the air. This place is vibrant.
Arcade.
The arcade.
Karaoke.
Yeah, karaoke.
Fundamentally, you know, I believe that you should treat others the way you want to be treated. It cannot be a stated culture on the wall,
Right.
and then something different. So it's important that as leaders, we're leading from the front, we're being open, we're being transparent about culture. And if folks know it's just words for you, or if folks know you're phony about it, people see through that.
Yeah.
And so people want something that's real. They want a real experience. And, you know, and I just want to close by saying, you know, at Access, our culture is the Holy Grail. Our culture is the Holy Grail. Our culture drives everything.
Wow.
So, by the way, if you want to see that whole video, and it is well worth watching, go to the Global Company Culture Association.com. It is there. Come join, come be a member. We really are about changing this thing we call workplace and getting a workplace, you know, culture where where this kind of toxicity is just not happening. It's not allowed. We haven't eradicated, but we've made a pretty big dent in racism. We've made a pretty big dent in sexism. We've made a pretty big dent in diversity and LGBTQ and, you know, what's allowed and what's not allowed. This should definitely apply in the workplace, and you shouldn't be allowed to be, you know, a toxic employee. So you get to say one thing to a C-level exec or a leader right now. What would you tell them?
Set the tone, live your values, and make sure your employees see you doing it every day.
I love it. I love it because the buck stops here and people are going to act like you act. So It's the Arsonist in the Office with Pete Havel. How do we get a hold of you?
You can reach me through petehavel.com or pete@petehavel.com for an email. And then my book's on Amazon as well.
Okay, and starting right now, the first 5 people who go join the Global Company Culture Association, they're going to get a free copy of your book.
Awesome.
Autographed by you. Which
That's right.
we're getting. That just means we got to get together because I bought the books on Amazon.
Exactly.
to just spread the word. So Another fantastic episode, Elise. Awesome as usual with lots of great content. So we're looking forward to our next episode that will be coming up next week with the great Dave Clare from Australia.
Wow.
But thanks for being our very first guest in the studio. Let's hear
Thanks
from
for having
Pete.
me.
All right. And that is a wrap.